Welcome to the first episode of Voices on the Edge of Change with Marsha Shenk, who for me is not just my life coach or my leadership coach, I think as she prefers to be called. She's not just my mentor, and she is not just one of my most loyal friends in my whole life. She is the most incredible pioneer, business anthropologist, and really trailblazer in business. And I'm absolutely thrilled that we are going to sit down over 3 podcasts and hear her life journey. So without further ado, let's get into podcast 1. Marsha Shenk, welcome, Marsha.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here with you.
I'm beyond excited. I think you know that I have waited for this moment for quite a while.
I do know.
Yeah. So most people won't know who you are and what you do. And hopefully by the end of this podcast, we would have come up with the right title for this podcast, which people would have known by the time they tune in.
Maybe.
But I think what lands for me, and the reason why I have been so excited to do this podcast with you, is because I want to take you back a little bit first. I was someone who was in the midst of quite a lot of turmoil in my life I think it's 1995. I land in Halifax.
2005.
I'm sorry, 2005. Where am I going? That's the year I got married, 1995. That's why I'm thinking 1995. Yes. We'll come to that a little later.
We shall.
But anyway, so I after quite an interesting journey, which we'll save for another time, I land in Halifax in Canada. And the first person I meet is you at a Buddhist leadership development program called Shambhala.
Yep.
And for those listening to this podcast, there will be a few people that have experienced Shambhala and will tell you that it is truly a life-changing experience. And dare I say it, meeting you changed my life. And it changed my life because you were somebody who immediately questioned me. From the second I met you, you started asking me questions that I didn't know the answer to. And you were curious, and you were kind, and you were thoughtful. And here we are, 20 years later, with me now recognizing perhaps something you recognized 20 years ago. And we'll get to that too.
Yes.
But what I'm really interested in is, for this particular episode, who is Marsha Shenk? Because I have, as a gift, as you know, because we've discussed this, I want to leave your legacy large and loud and wide across the internet, because I think it's really important that people understand the work that you've done, but actually the work you're still continuing to do. And so I guess what would be good to kick this off, because there will be other episodes, and I don't know in which order people will come to this, because the wonderful thing about podcasts is people can dip in and dip out. But if you haven't come to this as the first podcast, this is the first one. Tell me a bit about yourself, because you've called yourself a pioneer. You go by something called business anthropology. Most people in today's world would accept terminology like mentor, life coach, confidant, advisor. But one of the things I've noticed about you is you probably, and I know it's a word that people band about a lot about themselves, a trailblazer, but you have trailblazed, and you have very much, in my view, been way, way before your time. So I know I've thrown a lot of questions at you just now, but to unpack what you mean by being a pioneer. How did you come to this? Where did Marsha grow up? Who is Marsha, and why did you get here?
Yes, that's a lot of questions all at once, my sweetheart. And many people have asked me, And I don't really know the answer, of course, because I just lived my life. But I remember as a very young child, perhaps 5, maybe 6, that I had in the United States, we call a very sensitive radar for nonsense, a bullshit meter.
Okay.
And at 5 years old, I was asking myself, what in the world is wrong here? Because I could see that people were suffering in absolutely unnecessary ways.
Right.
I saw that my father's dignity was eroded in his workplace. Even though he was a high performer, there was a way that his dignity was being eroded. And I noticed that as a child. I wouldn't have known to use the word dignity. That's an adult word.
Uh-huh.
I also noticed that neighbors' children, my age cohort, were talking about things like how they had sinned. And it made me so angry. Who in the world told you that you have sinned? I mean, who's putting this nonsense into your head?
Yeah.
So I had a nonsense meter. And I was perplexed by it. And I mostly felt like a misfit. I just walked around feeling like a misfit. Like I was different than other kids and I didn't know why. Why am I so different? They seemed,
So what was different?
I was almost, I was observing the world. I was asking questions
Okay.
that nobody around me was asking. And I was reading a lot of books. And my mother had no idea what to do with me, but she took me to the library every week and let me take out as many books as I wanted. I would go home with 12 books and I would read them all in a week, and the next week I would want 12 more books. Why? I don't know why. I can't answer that.
And what were the other kids doing at the time? Were they just
Oh, they were,
outside playing?
yes,
Yeah, yeah,
they
yeah.
were riding their bikes, and I mean, they were doing what kids do. So I did have a sense of myself as a weirdo, and they would call me that.
Oh,
Right,
wow.
that
Okay.
they would say that I was a weirdo. So I had a sense of myself as a weirdo. And then I was, unfortunately, I had polio in the last epidemic in the United States in 1955. So I was 10 years old. And an epidemic isn't a good thing now either, as many of you now know, because now you've lived through one. But I was taken away from my family and put and isolated.
Wow.
So there was no one there with me. It was just me.
And what, do you mind me asking you what age you were when
I
you
was
had that?
10.
Wow, that's huge
It's
to be.
horrible. It was absolutely horrible. I didn't get to say goodbye to my brother. I just was taken out in an ambulance and put in a contagious disease ward, which is what they did then.
Mhm.
They isolated people. And now I was a brainy child.
Well, clearly 12 books a
God,
week, I would argue you were.
and very verbal.
Right.
And I was put into a context where no one listened to me. So I remember very clearly saying to the nurses, I cannot swallow. You have to take this pill. I cannot swallow. You have to take this pill. I cannot swallow. Well, they forced me to take the pill. And as a consequence, I had an emergency tracheotomy from which I still have problems. I still have difficulty swallowing because my swallowing mechanisms were damaged as a child. So there I am again thinking something is terribly wrong with the world. Why would they not listen to me? I also became very, very angry. And that anger probably saved my life because I came to the conclusion at age 10 that I was surrounded by idiots and that if I was going to survive, it was up to me. And I was right. I was
But
absolutely.
this set your path, really. I
It's
mean,
absolutely set my path. There was one other child who walked out that summer All the other children either died or they were permanently paralyzed.
Right.
One other kid made it through. I didn't speak to him about it. My mother asked him about it. He left right about the same time I did. My mother was there to pick me up, and she asked him how he did it. And he said, "Oh, I just concentrated on what I wanted to be doing after I got out of the hospital."
Right.
I did exactly the same thing.
Wow.
I had a picture in my head
Right.
of myself in my summer camp uniform from several summers prior, running. And I kept that picture in my head. At the same time, I was very angry at the people around me. And I was treated very badly. We won't go down that path. But I emerged from that experience just before my 11th birthday. I was in an iron lung for 8 weeks. I heard them tell my parents I couldn't possibly survive, that I was past the point of no return. But you see, I had already come to the conclusion that I was surrounded by idiots, so they were just being idiots.
Right.
I didn't take them
Because
seriously.
most people in those situations would lose faith, give
Well,
up, and effectively die,
right.
right? So
But you
your
see,
anger has pushed you forward.
exactly. This is not a good thing for a 10-year-old to believe that everyone around her is an idiot. It's not a good thing at all. But I made it out.
Right.
So I was just before my 11th birthday. I left I was able to leave. And there's a lot of interesting parts of this story. They told me it was too soon for me to walk. And I was like, oh, yeah. So I had another kid who was ambulatory steal a wheelchair. Every afternoon, he stole a wheelchair and brought it to me. And then he pushed me into a part of the hospital where they didn't have any children. We found a bathroom. We went into this big bathroom, locked the door, and I taught myself to walk. You wouldn't have called it walking if you'd been watching, but it doesn't matter. That's what I did. So when I left the hospital, I was wobbly and whatnot, but I was on my feet. And I really think I became the iconoclast that I am, although obviously I was already a weirdo. I mean, the other kids called me a weirdo, they knew. But I sent away the physical therapists and the speech therapists, and maybe they could have been helpful to me, but they all showed up to me like idiots. And I just couldn't stand having them around me. And I think my parents had no idea what to do, so they just humored me and let me go my own way.
And so from that moment, I mean, you've come out after, well, let's unpack that just a little bit, right, for our listeners. So you've had this enormous trauma. On top of the trauma, you've been, which would add to the trauma, clearly taken away from what was probably quite a safe
Right.
environment, good home life. And you're now away for, did you say 3 months, 6 months?
Yes, it was about 3 months total by the time a little short of 3 months.
And did you have visitors during this time, or you weren't allowed any visitors, or?
Well, during the time that I was in the iron lung, I was in a room where my parents could speak to me from a walkie-talkie outside
Right,
a
right.
window.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I reached the point where I could breathe on my own, which took about 6 weeks
Yeah.
till I could breathe on my own, then I could have some visitors. But they didn't let my brother in. He was really the only person I wanted to see. So I had some visitors, my parents, occasionally one of my parents, another adult.
So it's terribly frightening, isolating. It's a big trauma.
Absolutely.
Aside from the illness on top of whatever it was going to leave you with.
Yes.
And at that point, well, there was a view you wasn't going to leave you with anything because you weren't going to be here. And then obviously you were coming out, and then it was leaving you with, this trauma of having to learn to walk again, I suspect, and gain your balance and all of those things,
And
right?
yes, however, the moment that I left the hospital, I remember this clearly. I was just before my 11th birthday. I said to myself that I would spend my life showing other people that they could create their own reality, that they did not have to accept someone else's version of reality. And I wouldn't have used the word reality at that point either. I was still
No,
a
you were
child.
10. Yeah.
But that I would show people that they could forge their own way. And if you just think about that, you can just like fade out in that moment and then fast forward to 2005, at which point I was 60-ish, and I met you.
Yeah.
And you were feeling like you had to do what other people wanted you to do. And I went, no, you well friggin' don't.
Yes, you
And,
did.
and I am not a life coach. I am a leadership coach, and I don't do life coaching. But with you, I just put my big nose and my big shoulders into this, and I said, you can. And of course, you didn't believe me at the time, but here we are.
Yeah, and I said to Leo, who's very kindly recording these podcasts for us, so big shout out to Leo. But I said to Leo this morning that actually it's taken me, I've only just realized now, and I think we talked about this last night when we were designing the podcast, right? What that most of us don't understand what value we have in the world, and we'll get on to that.
Right.
And most of us don't understand what life story we've gone through which shapes us, and we've all got our own story to tell on that. And I think the other thing, which just to touch on your pandemic point, if I may, just again for our listeners, was when we were going into the pandemic in 2020, when we were all talking about this, we might be locked up moment. And nobody really, I mean, I remember sitting on the sofa with my daughter and we're looking at Boris Johnson, who was our prime minister at the time, on television saying we're going to lock everyone down. And we're like, well, what does that actually mean? And what do you mean the whole world is going to be locked down? And what does that even mean? And I remember my daughter sort of saying, does that mean I don't see my father because we were divorced? Does that mean I don't see my friends? My father had cancer? I was like, is he going to get medical attention? I was just like, and that sort of, and I remember because I was at the BBC at the time and I was part of the hybrid pandemic planning team. And we were talking to ABC in Australia, who had gone in and were coming out. This was sort of a bit of a parallel moment, and they didn't have the vaccine. And I remember saying to them during this, well, give me one thing I need to know about coming out, because I've got a chance to learn from you, good or bad, what I need to hold on to when we go in. And he said to me, and this is where this comes right back to what you were just talking about. He said, there's only one thing, Lou, that you need to know. However, how everyone leaves the office and goes into lockdown, not one person comes out the same
Right.
when they come back.
That's right.
So if we move back to you now and that sense of, so you've gone in one way, you've come out with shock, trauma, anger, questions, loads of questions, I should imagine, and having to build an enormous amount of resilience and strength because you're having to walk again. And I have had, and the only reason why I'm saying this is because I can sort of slightly understand. I'm not going to profess to know exactly, but I had a tumor removed from my ear when I was 21 and I couldn't walk. For 3 months, I had to physically learn how to put one foot in front of the other again. And I think if you haven't truly, and that's only just come to me actually, hearing your story, like, how do you walk again? Something you've taken for granted without thinking.
Right.
So here you are, you're at home. We'll take the listeners back. So you've arrived back at home thinking everyone's idiots in the world, that you're going to outdo everyone by the looks of things, and still have, by the way.
I didn't want to outdo everyone. I just wanted a sort of fairness or justice. I mean, and this sounds arrogant, but if they're not going to listen to me, who are they listening to? And I realized, people don't listen to each other. Oh my God, what a disaster. This is true, right? People didn't listen to you either, right? There's so much wrong And I came to understand, partly because of the experience in polio, that it wasn't anyone's fault, that everyone was in a poorly designed social context.
Yeah.
And that's how I became an anthropologist, because I started asking, wait a minute, how did we get here? How did all of us get here? How is it possible that we're all living in a society that doesn't take care of anybody? And it doesn't. It doesn't take care of anybody.
And you could argue, and again, we'll come back to this. So sorry to keep saying that, but we'll have to come back to it. But there's a feeling that that's how it feels right now,
That's right.
right?
Now everybody's onto it. But if you ask me how did I become a pioneer? Well, I knew it when I was 5 years old. I knew it because my mother was depressed. I knew it because my father wasn't acknowledged appropriately. I knew it.
Right.
I knew that something was wrong. I knew it because I couldn't fit in with other children. I mean, something was clearly wrong. I knew it as a child, and I really came to understand very early that it's nobody's fault. That it wasn't the fault of my father's boss that he was treated that way. It was the fault of the social context, which is not really designed for human beings. Now I'm going to go into my anthropologist babble, so I won't
So
do that. You go
no,
ahead and
that's fine.
keep it where you want to go.
Well,
But
I sort of want to go there just a tiny bit
okay,
because I think that most people listening now, whilst they'll be, you know, thinking of their own stories or journeys or someone they've known that's obviously had to come back from an incredibly serious illness. And I have to say, I've known you 20 years and I didn't realize the effects of polio because what I see, I don't see any. I've had a friend who had polio and I would know that he had polio,
yeah,
right? So I
nobody.
don't see that in
I
you.
know nobody knows.
No, and they would do now. But I guess for me, we keep mentioning this word anthropology, and I just would like to spend a couple of minutes on what you mean by that. What would you say is a business anthropologist?
So anthropology is a study of human behavior, but not just human behavior. It also studies the history of humans, like how the skeletons of humans changed over millions of years. So it's sort of the study of humankind.
Okay.
Okay. It was the only way I could go back far enough to understand the roots of how we got here. I started in college, I started studying the classics, and I realized, oh, that's not far enough back. How do I get farther back? The only way I could get farther back was through anthropology.
Right.
So now, taking that to what's a business anthropologist, it's business is a game that was invented by humans. There are many other games that were invented by humans. For example, the church that was teaching children that they were sinners when they were 5 years old. That's another game. Not a game I have much respect for, as you might imagine. So business is a game that was designed by humans. Okay. When did it get designed? Not so long
Right.
ago,
Okay.
actually, in human history. It's not so long ago.
Yeah.
So you have a colleague who mentions that we live in a culture that basically was formed in the Industrial Revolution. Correct.
Yeah.
The Industrial Revolution was about 200 years ago.
Yeah.
That's 10 generations.
So we're referring to a quote that we've both heard this weekend, actually, by Daniel Priestley.
Yes.
Not a colleague for the sake of this podcast, but somebody I'd love to meet. But so if he's listening, I'd love to meet you.
Yes.
But
me too.
but he made a very valid point that we are educating
Right.
our future generations in an old system, and
Correct.
we're not getting fit for the digital world, was
Correct.
roughly what he
Correct.
was laying the pretext to.
Right. And then getting back to my work,
Sure.
we are educated in a society that doesn't fit the human brain.
Interesting.
Well, I figured that out quite some time ago. I don't remember exactly what year I figured it out. That's why dignity is eroded in the workplace. I see it. So, why did I become a business anthropologist? So I could deal with that. So, I started approaching leaders and asking them if they wanted to build an environment where people could do their best work. And many of them said yes. So that's how I managed without an MBA.
And we'll come on to that, because nearly everyone you've spoken to in your time, and I know you don't like the word coach, but however you have worked with them, shall we say?
Oh, they see me
right?
as a coach.
Well, I see you as my life coach. I know
yes,
you don't like the
but
word,
not life coach, leadership coach. I
leadership coach.
focused on the job of leaders because I could see that a leader in a business has the power to create the social context where people can have dignity together. That's why I became a business anthropologist. I saw that, and it's because of what I saw as a child in my father. And it's true. I've done it time and time again. You can fairly easily create that context where people can contribute to each other, can see their contributions to each other, can see what is missing for the other person, as I did with you when we first met. I saw what was missing and went, I don't like that. I'm going to fix that. Well, it took me 20 years. Oh, well. But
yeah, it has
I
taken her 20
got the
years.
job done.
Yeah, no,
Surely.
and when we're, and I'm very conscious that it's only, and we've been very fortunate to be together for the last 3 days in each other's pockets, and I do, for the first time, I can say out loud that I do get my value.
I know you do.
And I haven't been able to say that no matter what I do. And that's a cultural thing. And I spoke to Leo about it this morning while we were setting up. And he said, I don't think if anyone asked me that question, I'd be able to answer that either.
Exactly.
So I want to get into why do we need to understand what our values are. But we're going to just take a quick break and come back and be back with you in a minute. So I'm just sitting here now that I'm reflecting back on what Marsha's first podcast said to us, and I'm thinking the trauma that she must have gone through. She wasn't just ill. She'd been taken away from her family. She'd been put into a situation that must have been incredibly scary, very unknown, locked away in an iron lung. She was hearing people talking about her, not to her. Anything that she heard was negative. She wouldn't survive. If she did survive, she would be disabled. Polio in those days was quite unknown. Most people didn't survive. She couldn't have family visit her. Everything that she needed at a really young age as a child, all of her safety mechanisms had been taken away. Yet in that moment, or through those moments, and there were a lot of moments, clearly, in 3 months, she was brave, she was strong, she was resilient. She was thinking, actually, no, I am going to beat this. I am going to do this. I'm not going to be beaten by this. When she talked about getting better and going into that private closet and being determined to walk, to ask one of her peers to help her to make that move into walking from not being able to walk. She'd always felt that she had something a little bit different, that she was quirky, that she had a different way of looking at the world. We see that quite a bit today, don't we, with people being neurodivergent. What was it like for her not to have people show up? How have you felt when people haven't shown up? How have you felt when you're in a situation where you can't do something again? I know when I had my mastoid removed, I had to learn to walk again. I had to learn to balance. That took me over 3 months too. But I had safety. I had people around me. I wasn't alone in the hospital. I had my family sit by the side of my bed, willing me better. She didn't have any of that. I find that really extraordinary. Her determination, her resilience, and her, one might say, strong mind, some might call it bloody mindedness, but the determinations and the resilience to get there. That she wasn't willing to comply with society. She wasn't willing to accept. All of that for me was huge. And that drove her to be the pioneer that she is today. That formed her in her really young, informative years. That formed her to be who she is today. So I ask you to think, what context have you found yourself in that has challenged you? Where have you gone in forming your ideas through a trauma, resilience, something that's felt really uncomfortable to you? Something where you've had to relearn a skill that you thought you took for granted. I know I've been there. When have you been there? I can't thank Marsha Shenk enough for her honesty and her bravery and sharing this very poignant story with us. There will be more to come from Marsha, and depending in what order you're listening to, we have at least 2 more podcasts to come. But if you are listening to this in the wrong order, there are 3 podcasts with Marsha so far in our second series of Voices on the Edge of Change. Thanks for listening.
This podcast is a Lou Roby production in partnership with Divine Media. Want to know more? Subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or contact us at lou@louroby.com.